Excellent shirt, my friend.
Thank you. Excellent jacket.
Thank you.
We got the nice.
You know what I've had when I was on the road with Clerks 3, this is what I've discovered my new passion thing. If you go to any big city, there's generally a suit store that sells suits. Like I think this doesn't say Gucci, it says Poochie or something like that. So they sell full suits, right? Like fucking jacket, pants, vest, and shit like that. And they're generally not that expensive. I don't know what suits cost because I've never worn them in my life, but I remember telling somebody, they're like, how much was the jacket? And I was like, well, it was a whole suit, but I just took the jacket, I left the pants and the vest. And they're like, why? And I was like, I'll never fucking wear them. And they're like, well, Jesus Christ, how much money did you spend? And I was like, 200. And they were like, for a fucking suit? And I was like, yeah. They're like, is it flammable? So, for me, I go into these stores now and I'll pick out the most, fucking showy jackets and shit. Like, this is all white, I got all red and shit like that. Shit you would never wear to church or whatever, but you would wear if you were a waiter or something like that. And so I slap them up on the counter and then I try to make a deal with the dude because I'm like, look, I just want the jackets and you can keep the pants and the vest. And they eventually, they'll throw you a couple bucks in where they're like, well shit, I can resell the pants. To who, I don't know, but I will. So they charge me even less for the jacket. So this jacket cost me $100 and I've worn it everywhere. I've worn it to death. I had a pink jacket I wore, or purple, I forget, people were confused by the color, as was I. And I wore that into the fucking ground. This is the new version of that. And I know there are rules about wearing it after Labor Day or whatever, but anyway, you didn't even ask your question yet. So I started rambling on about my fucking jackets and shit.
The worst part is the gummy kicked in when you started talking about it.
Oh, yeah! Come here. We're gonna get through this together. What are you seeing? Tell us what you see. A big, beautiful man in a jacket. That's a $100 jacket to you, my friend. Just keep your lighters away from it.
So during the pandemic, I rewatched all of your movies during a massive, I had nothing else to do during the pandemic, so I'm watching movies.
How fucking weird that never occurred to me. That would have been a great time to maybe rewatch all these and look back and shit. But instead, no, I watched The Wire again. But that was really good. Have you ever seen The Wire?
That's my background show when I'm doing
pretty
something.
funny.
Yeah, so. But I rewatched all of your movies, and the one movie I finally watched during your rewatch that I was always told either to avoid or I just never saw it, was Jersey Girl. And I had became a
piece
father.
Of shit. Not the movie you for avoiding it this long. Yeah, a lot of people, for a while, that was the one that hung around me like a fucking albatross and shit. For years in the beginning of my career, I would make Mallrats jokes. I went to the the film awards. What was it? The Indie Spirit Awards. The year before we won for Chasing Amy. So I'd go back in '97 and win an award for that. But this was me going the year before, and we had made Chasing Amy, but hadn't come out yet. And I'd written the awards show. Only time I've ever done it in my life. They're like, do you want to write it? And I was like, fuck yeah. And still to this day, I remember all the presenters that did my material, and I remember the presenters that are like, I'll do my own thing. And I sat in the wings and I was watching them bomb and be like, yeah, do your own thing. I was so petty when I was a kid. So, the Indie Spirit Awards. Why the fuck am I telling this story? Your shit kicked in on me too, man. Jersey Girl. So I'm at the Indie Spirit Awards in 1996, and I'm on stage. I'm presenting with Laura Dern. She was my co-presenter. And as soon as I got up to the mic, I was like, hey man, it is the Indie Film Awards, so it's fucking all the indie film community and shit. And I was like, hey, I just want to take this opportunity to apologize for Mallrats. I don't know what I was thinking. And it's a joke, and they all laughed and shit. Roger Ebert, when he reviewed Chasing Amy, was like, Kevin Smith's last movie was so bad, he apologized for it publicly in front of him. But this movie is good and stuff. So Mallrats was the whipping boy for years and a go-to joke where I was like, yeah, I am the guy that made Mallrats and shit, if I was ever being self-effacing. And then that blew up in my face, because 10 years after Mallrats came out, Mallrats had become what Mallrats is today. Like for many people, a cult classic. They found it in their worlds. They found it on cable. They found it on VHS or DVD, and it became their very own, the treasure movie that spoke to them. Like, oh, this movie it's like it was made for me or something like that. So 10 years erases the memory of the movie dying at the box office and only making $2 million for everybody else except the filmmaker. You know, I'll carry that shit like herpes for the rest of my life. Now, 10 years on from that point, and even today, 25 years on, people, or 24, people, no, shit, 29, fuck. 29 years ago. 29 years on, you know, people like the movie quite a bit, and I'm sure there are people that are like, fuck that movie, but largely, people love it in a way that they're like, why can't you make Mallrats? More like Mallrats, what happened to you and shit? When back in the day, people were like, don't you ever make another fucking Mallrats again. You know, mixed messages and shit. So for years, Mallrats was my whipping boy movie, but then I couldn't whip it anymore because I would say, like, people come up to me and be like, oh, I fucking love Mallrats. I'd be like, where were you when it happened? We couldn't use your fucking help. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, the movie flopped. And they'll all, invariably, this is the response. No, it couldn't have been a flop. I have it on DVD. And I was like, if only that was the metric for success. I would be Christopher Nolan, you know. So I had to stop using Mallrats as the whipping boy. Jersey Girl became the whipping boy for a good fucking 10 years as well. And then slowly, just as with Mallrats, and it doesn't have as much cult appeal as Mallrats does, but over time, like, that just becomes a harmless movie that you run into on cable or on DVD or something, and suddenly it's not the polemic of Bennifer or something like that, or it's not following in the wake of Gigli, it's not that the hot mess that it was when we released the movie. And so slowly over time, the people went from being like, you fucked up with Jersey Girl, you dumbass, to like, you know, George Carlin is great in that movie. And stuff like that. So time, and I'm not saying that, like, you know, every critic rewrites a review, not at all and stuff, but time heals. Like, and a movie will find its audience. They don't find it opening weekend and shit. Eventually they do. In the case of those two movies, they absolutely did. Yoga Hosers took the place of those two movies. That's my whipping boy movie. See? And here we are almost 10 years later, and the tide is starting to shift where people are like, my kid watches that movie all the time and shit. And no one remembers the heartbreak of fucking Yoga Hosers except me and stuff. So Jersey Girl, for years, I would actively like tell people like, oh, don't waste your time. Even though, like, I love the movie, it's a little piece of my heart. So I bear some responsibility in that as well.
So you actually answered my question, and I didn't really ask it.
That's because we touched.
Yeah, I literally was going to ask, like, you know, now years later after watching Jersey Girl, especially now that I'm a father, I see that I'm now looking at that in a different light,
right.
But it seems to be the same thing with everyone else. And I was going to ask, like, how do you feel about Jersey Girl kind of now starting to become that cult classic?
I mean, better snake than leather, right? Like, oh my God, I could have gone to my grave with people being like, you know, in my obituary being like, Kevin Smith, piece of shit who made Jersey Girl, remember that? Fucking died today, you know. And now they'll probably still be like, he made Clerks, we'll let him pass. But I do, I've always loved the movie, and you have weird relationships with the flicks because I spend so much more time with them than everybody else, right? Like, they begin in my dreams and shit. They begin as a whimsy, and then I nurture that whimsy into like, maybe it's a script, and then turn it into a script, and let me see if I can find money and means to do this, and let me see if I can convince people to join onto the cause, and suddenly it becomes like a movie, and then throughout the process of making that movie, every frame of it, I'm also editing it, every frame of it, so I'm like deeply, achingly familiar with the movie. By the time I'm finished cutting the movie, they turned your light off. Like, you're done. Don't fuck with him. His shit's just kicked in 10 minutes ago. Anyway, I do love that movie, and I've over time been able to like revisit it. I spend so much time with the flicks that by the time they get to you, Like it's like, ugh, I don't want to watch it one more fucking time. However, I was able to flip that. Why am I fucking hugging this? I was able to flip that when I was touring. Like that's what I loved about Jay and Silent Bob Reboot and Clerks 3 was we would take them out, take them here to the center stage. We'd take them out, and I'd be there for the screenings and shit, intro, and then we'd watch the movie, and then I'd come out afterwards and like do this as well. And it was like a concert. Like I remember going to this like screening in Kansas City, and they had a bar at their fucking theater and shit. So people were like walking past me. I'm in like the hallway, and they're like, "Love the movie, man!" They fuck off and come back with beers and shit 5 minutes later. And you know, we were charging like $75 a ticket to see a movie. And in my head, I'm like, if I paid $75 to see a fucking movie, I wouldn't get it. I'd urinate in the seat. Like, it's a lot of fucking money, man. Especially for like a fucking Kevin Smith movie. What, I carry this guy on my back for the rest of his fucking life? But then the person that owned the theater flipped the script for me. They were like, "That's huge." I was like, "God bless you." I was like, what do you mean?" And he's like, "They're treating your movie like it's a concert, man. Like that's the highest honor they could give it. It's like that. They go out, they grab their drink. It's a party to them. It's transcended just being a fucking film." And I like that. I was like, "Fuck yeah!" And then I leaned into that for the rest of the tour and realized how wonderful it was. And so I toured with Clerks 3. I made Clerks 3 just so I could fucking tour. When we were on the Reboot tour, I was like, "Oh my God, could you imagine what this would be like with a good movie?" You know, and I fucking came back with Clerks 3. So I spend a lot of time with the flicks, and generally there comes a cool off point where I don't see them for a while. And I'm working on the next thing and whatnot. But eventually they all circle back. I had a lovely screening of an extended cut of Jersey Girl at Smodcast. I own a movie theater back in Jersey. And so I have this cut of Jersey Girl that like nobody's ever seen. It was taken from an Avid in 2000. When did we make that? 2003. So it's an Avid output from 2003. Still watchable. You know, people coming to see like a long cut of Jersey Girl aren't there because they're like, "This better be 4K." You know? They're like, "We want to see all the J-Lo scenes that you fucking cut and shit." And so I've gotten to interact with the movie again. And even better was right before the screening, like Raquel Castro, who was the little Jersey Girl in the movie, she reached out. She was like, "Oh shit, like I see you're playing the flick." And I was like, "Hey man, if you're free, I'll bring you east, man. We can come do Q&A with me afterwards." So she came out and we had the screening and did a Q&A. And you know, she's still like, she was this little when I worked with her. Now she's about this tall. And she's still kind of petite young lady and stuff. But now she's grown ass like woman, like 24, 25, 26, something like that. And her perspective on the movie was just like absolutely darling for me. Like she remembered it, you know. And for me, when I think of the Jersey Girl experience, even though Raquel is right there on the poster, naturally I think about Ben and Jen and Liv. I spend the most time with them, but and George, you know, God rest his soul. But Raquel was there like every fucking day. So she was telling me stories like that I didn't even know about. She's like, "Were you there when I proposed to Ben Affleck?" And I was like, "You were 9. And she was like, "I had to make my move. Jennifer was getting close." She told this really sweet story about, you know, Jennifer is her mother in the movie, and in the uncut version of the movie, like Jennifer, even though she, spoilers, dies in the movie, she comes back in kind of ghost form and fucking dances with Ben, and then eventually dances with her daughter as well. It's the only time they cross over, you know, because she dies in childbirth. And so that version of the movie never saw the light of day, right? We hacked all that out. After Gigli was bombing at the box office, suddenly our bosses turned around and were just like, "Kill her." I was like, "Well, she's already gets killed. She dies in the movie, like she needs to die sooner." And it was almost like they built a marketing campaign around that. They're like, "Jersey Girl, don't worry, she's dead in the first 15. It was really kind of sad. So we had to like hack out a bunch of story that involved her, including that scene, which Raquel, as a little kid, you know, Jennifer Lopez is one of the most famous fucking singers on the planet, and Raquel is a singer. Just even now to this day, she has her own band and stuff. So she always wanted to see that, never saw it, except on the day that we shot it. So as her and her mom, who was like such a help when we were making that movie, because she like literally was Raquel's real director. actor. Like, she worked with Raquel on the script, and then Raquel came to set well prepared in a preternatural way that no 9-year-old should have been. But her mom was really good at that sort of thing. She was great with kid talent. So having them both at that screening and seeing that whole sequence that got cut, like Raquel was like, I would often dream that we'd never shot that because I never saw it. Like, it was just we shot it and then it never existed again. And she's going, it's exactly like I fucking remember. So she had, you know, technically in the movie that's Jennifer Lopez's daughter. So she sent it put up a video, I guess, on her TikTok or Instagram of her performing a J-Lo song. And fucking, she was so excited to tell me, she's like, Jennifer Lopez put a like on it. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, you realize you met this woman in real life, and she's like, I know, but like, she remembers. And then like the next time I saw Raquel, she's like, Jennifer Lopez is following me now. She's like, oh, I've waited for this for so fucking long. It's absolutely darling. So now I get to see the movie from her perspective, you know, and not just the story itself, but like what her story, because it continued after that movie and stuff like that. And it was fairly compelling. So I got to revisit it in a big bad way recently, and I love that flick. I love it because it reminds me of, like, you know, like I had worked with George on Dogma, I had worked with George on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, I had worked with George on Jersey Girl, I was gonna work with George on Zack and Miri, and then he passed away. So when we were working on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, you know, motherfucker came all the way out to Los Angeles, and George was always busy. 250 nights of the year, he was on a stage doing this in a casino somewhere, or at some club somewhere, or at a theater somewhere. Constantly fucking working, paying off a tax debt and stuff. Very, very true. He wrote about it in his book, so I'm not spoiling anything. But so he was tough to get, because he was always performing. You had to schedule him to get him to whatever, like, you know, if you have him working for one day on a movie, he's like, well, you need to get to these 6 months in advance because my schedule gets fucking set. But he moved some shit around to come out and play with us and stuff. And George was like nothing if not a fucking consummate actor. Like, I know we all know him as like one of the funniest men that ever fucking lived and shit like that. I know him as one of the smartest people I've ever met, if not the smartest man I've ever known. But he's known most to the world as like one of the great comic minds ever came out of the United States or the world. That wasn't his aim. He wanted to act. He wanted to be Danny Kaye. He wanted to be a song and dance man in movies and stuff. He just did radio, you know, and that led to him doing the Hippy Dippy Weatherman, and that led to him doing comedy and stand-up, and that led to him doing Burns and Allen, and that led to him kind of throwing away the tie and the short hair and going counterculture like his hero Lenny Bruce and stuff like that. And that kind of led to the guy who's like one of the 4 fucking faces on comedy Mount Rushmore, if there's any justice in the world. But that was not the path he chose. He backed into being one of the world's greatest comedians. It was not his first choice, wasn't even his second, it wasn't part of the plan. So he loved acting. That's why I picked up on him like right away on Dogma. I was like, oh, like George dreams about this. Like, you know, I'd seen him in stuff. I saw him in like the 6 You Get Egg Roll. I saw him in Bill and Ted. I saw him in Barbra Streisand's movie Prince of Tides and stuff. So he'd acted. I just had no idea how much he wanted to act on the regular. That was his thing. If he could have done that, he would have given up the stage. He loved to act. So he came prepared, and he came with questions. He came with deep fucking thoughts. Even on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where he essentially blows a trucker. That's the whole fucking scene. But George came up to me and he's like, Kevin, as the author of this piece, I have a question for you. I was like, okay. I'm here for it, what can I do for you? And he goes, in this scene, you know, I'm talking about the unwritten book of the road. I said, yes. He goes, okay, now, do I believe this shit? Or am I just fucking around with these 2 assholes? And I was like, you know, honestly, George, you've already put more thought into the script than I ever did. I said, if I had to guess, I would imagine that, you know, he believes it. And he goes, that's what I thought, that's my intention, that's how I'm gonna play it. And I was like, man, you really treat this shit seriously, don't you? I was like, you know, it is the James Silent Bob picture. You can throttle back. This ain't Dogma, as you can see. He goes, oh, I know. But he goes, but you don't understand the craft of acting, do you, director? And I was like, I don't know. Quiz me. And he goes, acting is the subtle art of making choices, bringing to life an action or a thought that the audience will feel conveyed as truthfully and as authentically as possible. Acting is honesty. And I honestly have to come at this in order for this thought that you've written to be conveyed to the audience. So you ask me if I have questions? Yes, I have a question. Do I do it like this? And I was like, you do whatever, you're comfortable. And he went and fucking blew the trucker in the city and shit. He was so fucking serious. So as we were done with Jersey, with shooting that scene that day, let him sit down. There's a chair right there, man. Don't fall over. You can sit. This is gonna take a minute.
Should I just head back to my seat?
No, you sit right there, man, just in case. You may have follow-up questions. So we finished shooting that day, and we're going into the next setup. George is done, so we're finished shooting him, but we've got more Jay and Silent Bob shenanigans to shoot. But everything takes a few minutes to set up, and where we were was far from base camp, and the next thing was going to be someplace else. So I had a few minutes, is the long and short of it. So I said, I'm going to take the ride back to base camp with George. They're putting him in a van and stuff, and base camp is where the trailers are and shit, because we were out shooting on the road with that white picket fence that, I've seen in Arrested Development, I've seen in so many fucking movies. Anytime they're like, we gotta shoot someplace in California, don't look like California, we all go to that one fucking road and shit. I go in to get in the van to take the ride back to base camp with George. Because remember, now this is the second time I've worked with him, but I'm a lifelong fucking fan of George Carlin. My father turned me on to George Carlin. He gave me George Carlin albums when I was fucking 10 years old. He said, do not let your mother hear you listening to this. Because my mom would get pissy if my dad would bring home comedy albums that had any cuss words in them. She'd be like, he's not allowed to listen to those cuss word comedians. He has to listen to good, clean comedians like Bill Cosby. You better believe I was the first person to call mom with that Cosby news when it broke. So there we are in the van, and I'll never forget it. The driver's there, Teamster driver, nice guy. He's the dude who's in the scene in the truck. The driver, because in order to drive an 18-wheeler, we had one of our Teamster drivers do it. So he's playing the guy who's driving the truck. So this is the dude that George pretends to blow. And then fucking 10 minutes later, he's giving George a ride back to base camp. So we get in the van and shit, and George gets in the van, the first thing he says is like, oh, we have to stop meeting like this. To the driver. And the driver's got some innocuous pop station, I think it was Britney Spears. And George gets in, closes the door, he goes, can we turn this shit off? I was like, you don't like Britney Spears? He's like, I don't know who that is. He's going, but I can't stand pop music. I was like, really? He's going, oh, you gotta realize, I've been alive a long time. So I've heard every variation of fucking pop song there is. I love you, you don't love me, you love me, I don't love you. Fuck them all, I hate them. I said, what do you listen to? He goes, I listen to jazz. I was like, really? I didn't think you were a jazz man. He goes, I'm not. I just listen to it because everyone hates it. Fuck them. So we're driving back. I was like, I can't thank you enough for coming out to play, man. That was killer stuff you did. And whatnot. He goes, Kevin, if you ever really want to thank me, you'll write me my dream role in a movie. And I was like, okay, I'm done and done. What's your dream role? And he's like, without fucking missing a beat, he goes, I've always wanted to play a clergyman who strangles 6 children. It was the specificity that lodges in my brain. He had a number in his head. Which means he had the whole movie plotted out, First 15 minutes, next 15 minutes, So I said, I just did Dogma, so I think I already did my religious picture, but I'll try, And that was the end of the conversation. Next thing I wrote was Jersey Girl, and I wrote the lead for him. Not the lead, Ben was the lead, but I wrote him Ben's dad's part and shit. Look at that, I got you a water and shit. They're really concerned about you, man. They don't want to lose you and shit. So weird, I could have offered your mine, it never occurred to me. That's because I'm from Hollywood. When you're from Hollywood, you know, it's like a normal person walks into a room and sees a bowl full of apples and goes, oh, how nice, somebody set apples out. Someone from Hollywood walks into a room, sees the same bowl full of apples and goes, oh, somebody left apples for me. So, I write Jersey Girl, I write the part of Ben's dad for George's play. And I send him the script, FedEx it to him, with a cover letter. And I said, George, this is Jersey Girl. I want you to play the character of Bart. Ben is playing your son. Let me know what you think. And then 2 days later, I got a phone call from George. And I said, hello? He goes, Kevin, George Carlin. And I said, oh, I know. And I said, did you get the script? He goes, I did. And I said, you read it? He goes, I did. I was like, what'd you think? And he goes, well, there's a little girl in it, but I don't strangle her. He's going, but I'm sure you know what you're doing. So I just think about that movie now through that perspective too, of like, he was in heaven. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what he dreamed about doing, playing a role like that, like with an authentic kind of voice to it and whatnot. It's funny, when we started shooting, he was trying to do an authentic Jersey accent. And I was like, if you don't fucking give me George Carlin, you're fired. You know? And he goes, oh, you want Carlin? And I was like, yes, that's what I wrote it for. So it's a movie that I happily revisit when I revisit it these days. In his case, it's like visiting with an old friend. Like, it's so funny, whenever I look at that movie, I think of this outtake that I don't even know if we put on the DVD. I don't know if we did outtakes or anything like that. But there's this one moment where he's sitting at the bar, and it's him and Stephen Root and Mike Starr and Ben and Jen are in the background. And he's just like, I was like, just ad-lib some bar conversation. And we were in the middle of the Gulf War. George Bush Jr. That's when we were shooting the movie. So and now Jersey Girl is set in the past, particularly this portion of the movie is set before the Gulf War, because we spend most of the movie in the present with the girl being like 9 years old, so we start 9 years earlier. So this sequence is taking place 9 years before the present. So he's ad-libbing, he goes, it's a shame about that war in Bush, right? And then he stops and he goes, you know, the first one? It's like, yeah, I'm trying to slip that in, see if anybody notices. But I love the movie because it was a story I wanted to tell. I remember, like, that was the movie that was, you know, me reacting to being a dad. That was my post-Harley movie. So people that don't like my shit later in life always love to blame the kid. They're like, oh, he had that kid, that's where shit went downhill. But that was the movie where, like, you know, I was like, well, I want to do a thing about fatherhood, because that's where I am now in life and shit like that. And I wrote the script and I gave it to Jennifer because I was like, this is my Valentine to you. I wouldn't have written something like this unless you'd come into my life. So this is for you. And she read it and she goes, how is it a fucking Valentine? Like, the wife dies in the first 15 minutes and then he hooks up with Liv Tyler. Like, fucking, I was like, well, it's through one perspective, it's a Valentine. But when I think of it, like, I think about George now, more often than not. It's weird because Ben and Jen are in the news, so naturally I could think about them. But it's really like there was a guy who meant the world to me. You know, like, listening to George Carlin albums made me the individual that I am today. He made me fall in love with language, both good and bad. And as he said, there is no such thing as bad language. Like, there's bad intent and shit like that. But he kind of, raised me, my parents did, but he made me dream about being something else. The reason I stand here and fucking talk is because I watched him do it as a kid, and then listened to him do it all throughout my childhood and into my 20s. And when I made Clerks and they put us out on the film festival circuit, after the movie's done, they kick you out there and they're like, go fucking answer for it. So you wind up doing Q&A, and I've been to Q&As. Most of the Q&As are earnest. These are filmmakers talking about their craft. But I made one fucking movie. I didn't feel like I could stand up there and kind of wax rhapsodic about being a filmmaker. So instead, I remembered, like, if you're gonna stick a microphone in your hand, try to be funny. So I would get up and be like, I can't tell you what the movie means. Let me tell you how we got that cat to shit on cue. I only started doing that. That became a huge part of my life, honestly. In the last fucking 10 years, I make more money standing on a stage talking about making movies than I do actually making movies. And all of that came from listening to George growing up. Like, he made me want to be a public speaker. Not my whole life, it wasn't the aim, but when somebody was like, get out there and speak publicly, he was my role model and shit like that. And I could not pay my master back for all he had given me in this life, except I found out the one thing that meant the most to them, which was acting. And so that movie stands as like the one thing I could give back to the guy who had everything, who literally opened up my fucking world. We're not having this conversation if I'm not listening to George Carlin as a kid. If I didn't sit down with my family, with my father, I bonded with my father over Carlin. I remember when my father came to me when Carlin was first going to do Carlin and Carnegie on HBO. And he was like, we didn't have the language for it. Now you would just be like, oh, there's gonna be a Carlin special or something like that. My father came up to me and was like, George Carlin is gonna tell jokes for an hour on television. Almost like, funny man tell a long time joke, you know, trying to describe it to me in most primitive terms and shit. And I was like, what, can we watch that? And my dad's like, yeah, we're gonna watch it. And my mom's like, oh, I don't know if we should watch that. Like, George Carlin is kind of racy, you know, and my dad goes, oh, Grace, stop it, George Carlin is Catholic, it'll be fine. And I don't know if you've ever seen Carlin at Carnegie, but like, it opens with him coming out on stage and doing like one of his best one-liners that he ever came up with, where he goes, have you ever noticed that people who are against abortion are people you wouldn't want to fuck in the first place? And all of Carnegie Hall explodes in laughter. My father, he's sitting on the couch over here. My mom's sitting in a bar lounge over here. I'm laying on the floor on my belly eating a TV dinner. My father busts out laughing hysterically. My mother instantly leans forward and goes, I don't like this at all. And my father goes, leave it alone. And she goes, no, it's gonna make the boy ask all sorts of questions. And my dad goes, no, it won't. And I turn to my dad and I go, Dad, what is abortion? My mother's like, see? She storms off and shit. But then she came back. Like, I asked my father, I was like, should we stop watching it? I was scared. And he goes, no, let's keep watching. And eventually she did come back. She came back and we started talking about Tippy, the farting dog. That she was like, I like this is clean. I noticed that he could work on a couple different levels. Like, he was working on fucking esoteric stuff, smart humor, and he could just do fucking dumbass animal fucking humor, or Rice Krispie humor, you know. Rice Krispies floating proudly in the milk and shit like that. And I love that, and I love that my family was brought together by that guy. And I love, you know, I love my father, and that my father loved that guy. Of course I was gonna love that guy. Like, my father respected the shit out of him. My father set the tone. So, being able to like be like, here, man, here's the one thing I know you fucking want. And sadly, it's in a Kevin Smith movie, but, you know, better snake than liver. And so, he was happy. The whole time we were making that movie. I'm so fucking happy, man. He was so appreciative and stuff, so grateful. Then we made Zack and Miri next, and I'd written the part for him. He's the guy that's supposed to sell him the space where they're gonna make the movie. Tom Savini eventually played the part. That was supposed to be George. And then George's manager, Jerry, called up and said, George can't break his Caesar's date, so he's gonna call you to let you down. And I was like, you know what, that's totally fucking cool. George could never let me down. Tell him to call, it's totally fine. And George called and he goes, Kevin, George Carlin. I was like, hey man, he goes, I'm sure by now you've heard. He's going, but if I know you, you'll have another piece of shit ready to go in 6 months, so shall we? And I was like, we shall. And he passed away, so we didn't get to do it again after that. I still have a saved message from him. It's really funny where he goes, Kevin Smith, George Carlin, listen, just want to tell you, this is a few months before he passed away, probably within the last year of his life. He goes, just want to tell you, I'm going into rehab. Nothing bad. I'm just, I'm hitting the wine a little hard, and I want to get ahead of it before it gets ahead of me. But I just wanted to tell you, because the press might be calling, and if they call, feel free to tell them that I'm going in and tell them exactly what I said, okay? Fuck the church. So I get it, like, I get how fucking some people could come down on Jersey Girl, but for me, I can't, because I'm like, fucking, that was a gift to George Carlin. He's the one that got the Valentine at the end of the day, and my wife so much is George. So I love it for that reason, and it's easy for me to watch for that reason. And plus, I'm a huge Ben Affleck fan, always have been. And so, he is the bomb in fucking fantasy. They're releasing a fat-ass fucking Blu-ray set of Phantoms. And the day they announced it online, my fucking Twitter feed was just, people like, oh my God, you must be so excited. That's one of the still to this day, Affleck always fucking like says, like, you know, of all the things you've done to me that are offensive, the one I really hate you for is like stranger. I'll be out in public with my children, and strangers will scream at me, Affleck, you the bomb in Phantoms you are. I was like, that's my gift to you, because you sold me the house cheap. All right, is that good? You made it through?